Welcome to Green Time. I'm host Don Fitz. This episode we're going to be talking about the green revolution, promise or peril. Before we get into our discussion, let's take a look at a DVD about what goes into the organic revolution, which is from the DVD Nicotine Bees.
I would ask the average homeowner to reassess the importance of the land that they own and the plants on that land, and to understand the important role that those plants now have, and then to enhance that role. So realize that if you own an acre of land, that's precious habitat, or at least it could be. So how can I change this land in ways that will support an indigo bunting in my yard? What I want to convince people of is that their gardens now have a function. The plants in their garden are there for aesthetic reasons, which is all we used to think about, but now they've got an ecological function that used to be done by nature out there, but nature's gone, so let's make those plants functional in our garden. And that function is to produce food that supports other living things. When those other living things come in to get that food, we can't spray them with our spray cans, or we've destroyed the function of our gardens. So we need a new mindset about what the role of our gardens and our landscapes are. So the notion that anything that's crawling on my plants has got to be killed is outdated. It never was healthy. There's increasing evidence of home pesticide use being linked to childhood leukemia, and that goes for the pesticides from lawn care companies as well. So it's just not a healthy way to respond. We need to build biological corridors that connect those little spaces we have saved. We need to put more plants back in this savanna-like landscape that we've created, and those plants have to be largely native plants, or they're not going to function the way we want. We've got to regreen the areas we live. So what I want to do is have attractive landscaping that's not going to be offensive to anybody. The bulk of it will be woody plants that support more biodiversity than do perennials. You can still do attractive perennial landscaping. And find ways to recreate this landscape. Make new status symbols, in other words. The new status symbol is how much life can I have on my property, not how sterile can I make it. Yeah, what would my dream look like? Well, I say, you know, with tongue in cheek, but I'm actually serious. I want to re-landscape the whole U.S. Actually, a lot of people find that pretty threatening because they make their living based on large lawns or importing foreign plants, and they don't want to hear that. And it's not going to happen overnight, but the carrying capacity of a particular area, the area of that, the ability of that area to support life is going to depend on the amount of plant material that is in that area. Because plants are life givers. You know, they produce the food. They're the ones that fix the carbon with energy from the sun. They take the energy from the sun, turn it into simple sugars and carbohydrates, and that is the food that everything else eats. So the more plants you have, the more food you have, and then the more animal diversity you have. We have lost the sense of why we need to have other living things on this planet besides ourselves. We get the idea that we can exist and be happy with things we get at the mall. But where did those things at the mall come from? The things at the mall all came from healthy ecosystems. And that's why we need biodiversity. It is biodiversity that runs the ecosystems that we humans depend on. Those ecosystems produce what ecologists call ecosystem services, such as the production of oxygen, the recycling of our garbage, the sequestration of carbon dioxide, extremely important today. You know, a third of the carbon dioxide we put into the atmosphere every year comes from chopping down our forests and burning them. So if we could reforest this planet instead of deforesting it, we could stall the global warming problem for a long time. You can lock up carbon in a tree for 500 years, no problem, while we're figuring out what to do with all the other carbon we're throwing in the air from the fossil fuels. What other ecosystem services do we need? How about cleaning water? Biodiversity cleans water. All over the globe, we've got poison water, dirty water, you know, water that is contaminated and can't be drunk. We've got salty water that we can't drink. Biodiversity not only cleans it, it helps to cycle it. Biodiversity modifies or moderates weather systems.
Welcome back to Green Time. I'm host Don Fitz. What we just saw was some excerpts from the DVD Organic, which is part of the larger DVD Nicotine Bees. We're going to be talking about the Green Revolution, Promise or Peril. With me I have a couple of guests who know quite a bit about organic farming. I have Paul Krautmann, who's with Bellews Creek Farms, and I have James Meinert, who is with New Roots Urban Farm.
Yep.
Paul, tell us a little bit about Bellews Creek Farm. That's in Jefferson County, am I correct?
In Jefferson County. It's right on Bellews Creek. It's where the farm gets its name. It's south and west of St. Louis, near Cedar Hill, Hillsborough area.
And you grow about how many acres do you farm there?
We have 77 acres total in the farm, and out of that we grow vegetables and small grains on about 12 acres.
Okay, great. And James, about how many acres do you grow?
We don't count it in acres because we have about 3 city lots.
About 3 city, okay.
We may be growing about half an acre.
Okay, and so it's great to have both of you here because we can talk about, urban farming and rural farming, and there's the overlaps are very, very large. Okay, well, what we just saw was from the whole issue of using organic agriculture, and this goes into the Green Revolution. But first of all, what was the Green Revolution?
Green Revolution started, I think, in the 1960s, early 60s. This was all of this new kinds of hybrids and new kinds of fertilizer and industrial chemicals that were being used in the United States. And it was our idea that there were these poor, starving souls in godforsaken parts of the world that needed to have this technology. And so to get them to have that technology, we kind of twisted their arm to get it through the World Bank. If you want to renew your agriculture, if you want to build back your agriculture, you need money to do that. We've got the money, but you're going to have to use our technology to be able to access the money.
Okay, and James, did that help the people in other parts of the world become independent and strong?
Well, definitely not. If anything, it just strapped their countries with a lot of debts. I mean, the U.S., the American reason for doing this was because we had a lot of chemicals left over World War II, and found out that we could make them turn into fertilizer, sort of. And so we wanted our companies to keep producing and making money, mostly at the cost of the family farmer and global small farmers.
Right, and so the Green Revolution has been a boon for the big companies, but it's been not so great for some of the people who
not so great.
use. Well, let me ask you this: in the DVD, they talked a lot about cultivating soil and using carbon. When we think about plants growing, we think of them as separate from the minerals in the soil. We think of them as separate from other plants. We think of them separate from animals. Is there any sort of general interconnectedness there?
Absolutely. We're all made out of the same stuff. We're all air, water, and sunshine and soil. Okay? If there's something bad in the soil, then there's something bad in the plants. If there's something missing in the soil, there's something missing in the plants. If there's something missing in the plants, there's something missing in the animals that eat the plants. And so, and the whole thing, it's all part of one. We're not getting something novel from some well in the middle of the ocean here. This has all got to be here. It all has to be here to be able to make healthy plants, healthy people, healthy animals, and so healthy soils.
Right. Okay, James, before when we were talking about the show beforehand, you emailed me that plants are the only living beings that convert sunlight to energy in a sustainable way.
Sure.
Could you tell me what you mean by that?
Well, they not only convert sunlight into energy, but if you grow enough of them in the right species, you can actually keep building soil and building more nutrients here on Earth. We're actually just taking energy from the sun, and we as humans can help manage to continue building up our Earth. However, most of our other technologies to garnish energy from the sun, such as windmills or solar, require petroleum energy also. We have to make that plastic to make solar panels. We have to have factories, we have to have electricity to run them, and all of those things aren't going to last forever. And so
we also have to dig rare earth metals out of another part of the globe, and we have to transport those from another continent over to the United States in order to manufacture them, so that a solar panel doesn't appear out of nowhere.
Right. And so if we don't have electricity and petroleum to run all that, in 100 years we're going to have a bunch of broken solar panels, and we're still going to have plants pulling solar energy to grow.
Okay, and so we really do, this variety is what's absolutely critical.
Yeah.
Okay, let's take a look at the next part of the DVD where Vandana Shiva is going to be talking about the Green Revolution, and we'll be back in just a few minutes.
We're repeatedly told that there is no way out of chemicals because chemicals produce more food. Nothing could be a bigger lie. Chemicals produce more chemical toxins. Chemicals do not produce more food. Food is nutrition. And chemically produced food is nutritionally empty food. And studies have now shown that 70% decline in calcium, 80% decline in magnesium, 50% decline in iron in our food systems as the soils that grow the foods don't get adequate nourishment and just get their nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium. And plants fed with this incomplete diet are also highly vulnerable to pests. So you end up spraying more pesticides, and the package, chemical package, in fact, creates not just nutritionally empty food, but nutritionally empty food loaded with toxics. Now that's not a very smart way to grow food. While I was walking around in the village, people were walking with spray guns and on the cycle, in a bullock cart, everything was poison, poison, poison. So I stopped to talk to an old man who was carrying pesticide in his bullock cart, and I said, Baba, do you know what you're carrying? He says, yes, medicine. Because it's called medicine in Indian languages. So he said, medicine. I said, it's not medicine, it's poison. And I pulled out, I said, this is what he's saying. And I told him, I linked it to Bhopal. I linked it to the emergence of pests with resistance. I linked it to the death of pollinators, to the death of predators. And this old man, his eyes had tears. And he just said, now I understand why even my mango tree doesn't give fruit anymore. So the Green Revolution was introduced to India 65, 66. We'd had a drought. We hadn't had a famine. We just had a decline in production. And the crisis was not severe in rural areas. It was severe in the new industrial urban complexes that were being built, where labor had to be fed with cheap food. And so India wanted to import extra wheat. And the United States said, sorry, we won't give you wheat unless you change your agriculture. And they used the scarcity as a conditionality to introduce chemicals and the new seeds, which were called miracle seeds. And Norman Borlaug was given a Nobel Peace Prize for the Green Revolution with the claim that these new seeds and chemicals would create prosperity and prosperity would create peace. All this was happening at the time when China had gone red. And the only reason the Green Revolution was called green was to be different from red. In the initial stages, these chemicals were brought for free. Okay. They were brought with subsidies from the World Bank. And the World Bank joined the government of the United States to impose this so-called revolution on India. First 2-3 years it was for free, but it was still with conditionality. Conditionality that if you don't take these seeds and if you don't use the chemicals, you can't get a loan, you can't do anything. So farmers were literally forced into it. The country was forced into it with conditionalities from the World Bank and the United States government, and the farmers were forced into it by conditionalities of the government of India. And I guess because I didn't come from agriculture, I came from physics. I could do something that most agriculturists don't. Most agriculturists look at agriculture either as entomologists, in which case the solution is spray and kill, or as agronomists, in which case you breed to respond to chemicals, or soil scientists, but most soil scientists of today only work on what chemicals to apply to soil, not what is the life of the soil itself. You don't really find in agriculture a holistic vision in today's, industrial agriculture training. Because I'm a physicist, I was able to look at the system as a whole, and this is what I found about the Green Revolution. First, that it was really a package to introduce chemicals in a country that didn't need them. India has been one of the homes of the evolution of agriculture. We are probably the longest living civilization in continuity. The second thing about the Green Revolution was that it replaced the diversity of crops we grow. We in this country have always grown crops in rotation. We change what we grow on the land, and we constantly farm with mixtures and polycultures and diversity. Okay. Now the Green Revolution replaced the diversity of Punjab with monocultures, which were repeated year in and year out, requiring lots of external inputs. And as is the case with chemicals, the more you apply them, the more you need them. So you begin with 1 sack of urea, and by the end of 2 years you need 4, and by the end of 5 years you need 20. And I've just done a very rough calculation. Pre-Green Revolution to now, our chemical fertilizer use has jumped 30,000%.
Wow. Like
now, of course, food production hasn't jumped that way. And just like any drug is introduced for free in the first step, I have never seen a drug addict buy their first bit. The first bit is always given for free.
Hands it to them, yeah.
Yeah. And as you get to become more and more dependent on it, you need more and more. And the early steps of providing it for free and through subsidies are then withdrawn. Right. And now the addiction works. But addiction means you have higher costs of production than what you're getting for what you have produced. As a result of which farmers are indebted. The Green Revolution requires monocultures. When you allow plants to grow on their own terms, they will grow in diversity. When you grow them under chemical conditions, they must be monocultures, because chemicals have to be applied according to a crop. Okay. And so the external application reduces your agriculture to a monoculture. We in this country have always grown crops in rotation. We change what we grow on the land, and we constantly farm with mixtures and polycultures and diversity.
Welcome back to Green Time. I'm host Don Fitz, and with me I have James Meinert, who is with New Roots Urban Farm, and Paul Krautmann with Bellews Creek Farm. Now, what we just saw Vandana Shiva end up saying is that using pesticides is like being addicted to a drug. Is that a fair statement?
Go ahead, Jane.
Well, I've never been addicted to a drug, so it's hard for me to say exactly. But what I will say is that the way that the U.S. and the corporations that produce these herbicides have used them is very similar to being drug dealers, in the sense of, across Latin America, they give them free genetically modified soybeans. And so they try to get people hooked, and then even when they're not producing as well, even when you can see that it's destroying the farmers, what Monsanto has said is, our business is just making profit. We're not interested in whether or not food is growing. That's the farmer's business. And that just kind of shows you,
And I beat them over the head because they're saving seeds.
Well, Paul, she also makes the comment that the food is less nutritious. Do we have any reason to believe that using a lot of chemicals in industrial produced agriculture is actually making food that we don't get as much nutrition from?
Absolutely, it's true. I mean, again, it's what I said earlier here. If you don't have the things it takes to make nutritious food, if the soil doesn't have those things, then it can't give those things. And if you continually, what farming does is it takes a crop and removes it. And a crop is air, water, sunshine, and soil. So every time that you remove part of what grows on a farm, on an urban landscape, and send it off somewhere remote from the farm, there is soil that leaves with that crop, whether it's corn or whether it's lettuce or whether it's radishes or soybeans or whatever. Those things, this is fertility migrating off of your farm. If you don't replenish it somehow by adding fertilizers in the case of commercial agriculture, or if you don't rock powders or compounds dragged out of mines and so forth, to replace those things that are missing from your farm, then you don't have them on your farm anymore. And the things that, and this is on a global scale, it's on a national scale here in the United States, that the things that we eat no longer have the things that they say they have. And those tests were done back in the 60s or so.
People can simultaneously be overweight and undernourished.
They can be overfed and undernourished.
You could be eating a lot of food. We're eating more food than we ever have before, but we're not necessarily getting more nutrition.
There's a big difference between feeding people, filling bellies, and feeding people.
Most of us are normal weight and undernourished.
Right.
You know, we're still not getting the nutrients even.
Well, let me ask you about toxic food. I don't think Vandana Shiva talked about that, but in 2011 we had the big issue of cantaloupes, with over 24 people dying from cantaloupes. And a few years before, I can't remember what year it was, that there was the big recall of spinach.
Yeah.
Now, how is it that spinach and cantaloupe would make people die?
Well, it's important to remember that it's not spinach and cantaloupe that kill people. It is the organisms that are on there, the listeria, the E. coli 157H6, or whatever it is, that is accumulated and has the opportunity to contaminate large amounts of food because of the industrial scale that agriculture has done at this point.
Okay, but is there any difference between large-scale agriculture being more susceptible to these sorts of diseases and small urban farms and small family farms?
Of course, Don. I mean, if you are a family farm or a small farm, you know your land, you know your soil, you know your plants, and you take care of them. The reason that there's these outbreaks is because it's a business and they're trying to make as much profit as possible. So a lot of them hire immigrants, many without papers, and they're people that aren't necessarily connected to that piece of land. You know, they might have had a piece of land they're connected to, they left. And so if you don't leave water sitting, you know, in a gigantic puddle like what caused this last cantaloupe outbreak, they traced it to a factory that just had tons of old equipment and water sitting everywhere. You know, if you're trying to grow healthy food for yourself, your family, your neighbors, your community, you don't let stuff like that happen. But if you're just trying to make profit, you can overlook all of that and just keep pumping out cantaloupe after cantaloupe.
I think it also has to do with the volume of things. You know, if you're pumping out 2 million cantaloupes a day, it's difficult for 100 people to keep the right number of eyes on that process.
Yep.
Yeah, but
the right number of eyes that actually care about what's going on and what their reputation is. They don't have any. They're not vested in that cantaloupe.
Nope.
You know, if somebody gets sick from the cantaloupe, why, it wasn't me that did it. You know, it was a farm that did it.
It's just very much removed. Well, let me ask you this: what about when we think of a company like Monsanto and putting out a lot of GMOs, which is the latest phase of the green revolution? How does a genetically modified organism affect the quality of food?
I mean, there's lots of studies showing that you know, animals like rats fed genetically modified food versus, you know, genetically modified potato versus a normal potato, they have a lot of health issues, more allergens, allergic reactions, intestinal breakdowns, heart issues. All these different studies have showed that beings fed genetically modified food don't get as much nutrition and actually have internal issues. Some can even be precancerous, you know, that have showed cell multiplication that could be cancerous. But we don't know because we're eating so much of it, but it might be when we're, you know, 60, 70 that we get cancer, and how do we know that that was from a lifetime of eating, you know, GM foods?
Right. Paul, what do you think about GMOs? Do you agree that they're could have negative health effects, or do you think they could be positive overall?
Well, I think they can be both. You know, I think that GMOs right now are in their infancy, and this is a kind of an awkward adolescent stage. That what we're doing right now is primarily making the world safe for glyphosate,
right?
You know, and so making crops safe for that. But I do think that this technology has potential. There's one individual who has figured out the golden rice situation and has gotten vitamin A into rice, which is doing wonderful things in Asia with eyesight issues.
We got to take that up in another show, but I want to thank Paul Krautmann for coming. I want to thank James Meinert, and I want to thank you for tuning into this episode.